Your support helps us bring you programs you love. Go to wyomingpbs.org, click on Support, and become a sustaining member or an annual member. It's easy and secure. Thank you.
Main Street, Wyoming is made possible in part by grants from Kennecott Energy, proud to be a part of Wyoming's future in the uranium exploration, mining, and production industry, and by the Wyoming Council for the Humanities, enriching lives of Wyoming people through the study of Wyoming history, values, and ideas.
We had oral reading. We would read at our desks and study a lesson assigned us, and then we would go up to the study and the recital bench and read out loud. And I can remember the day that I was put up in the class with my younger brother, we came to the word island, and I had never had that word, and I had missed it, and I was reading along and I was calling it Island, and my brother called it Island when he read out loud, and the class laughed at him, and I felt guilty because I was saying that to myself and I didn't speak up. I felt guilty.
When you study the westward push of American civilization in the 19th century, whether you do it in books or on the ground, you take note of landmarks, railroad tracks, military forts, even irrigation ditches. But none of these quite symbolize the advance of civilization across the country like the one-room schoolhouse. All across America, settlers made the education of their children of the utmost importance. In the mid-19th century, it was government policy too. In 1840, a quarter of all Americans were illiterate, and education experts like Horace Mann and John Dewey saw the public schools as a key element in shaping a healthy society, encouraging good citizenship, and assimilating immigrants.
Most of us walked or rode our horses. Sometimes I rode horseback. I couldn't even get on a horse now. I'd be afraid to death of one, but I had my own little saddle mare, and my dad was a rancher, and we rode our horses or walked, and I had almost 2 miles that I had to go. The other children all walked too, from various directions. Sometimes in the wintertime, they'd have frosted ears when they'd get to school, or their fingers would be frosted. And the teacher had an old wind-up phonograph that she used to play John Philip Sousa marches on, that we'd stomp around and warm our feet. And as I told you before, one of the main marches that I remember was Stars and Stripes Forever, because I warmed up to it many a morning.
I think that the rural schools really, the teachers gave the children a lot more individual attention, even though they had all the grades. They gave the children a lot more individual attention, and they knew what each one was doing individually. When the teachers have 30 or 40 children, I don't think they get what we got. And I know that I did get a lot out of school, and I remember the things that I learned.
I can tell you that in Wyoming, the one-room schoolhouse in Wyoming dates all the way back to the 1850s, when the very first school in Wyoming was established for school children at Fort Laramie. And one-room schools for the next 100 or so years were a very common part of the Wyoming scene. In fact, there were one-room schools in the 1850s, 1860s, 1870s in Wyoming, at places like Fort Bridger on the in the southeast part of the state, where Judge Carter out there, who was the post-sutler, brought a teacher out to teach his children. And that was essentially a one-room school there. And so they've been in existence in Wyoming ever since the very beginning.
Phil, can you give me a sense of the rise and the decline of the one-room school? Can you show me the curve?
Well, the one-room school in Wyoming, we can look at the period roughly from the 1890s up until the Great Depression as the period when one-room schools really became very common in Wyoming. And part of the reason for that was the increase in agriculture in various parts of the state, where an individual could actually make a living on 640 acres or so, and that was pretty tough to do in the days before irrigation and the days before dry land farming became popular. And so consequently, it was these farm communities, primarily in Wyoming, where you see a proliferation of one-room schools in the 1890s, and up into the 1920s, in fact.
When educational consolidation occurred throughout the United States in places like Wyoming and South Dakota and Nebraska, it closed up all the little rural schools where maybe every couple of miles, every 3-4 miles, there was a little school that students then went into town school, and the town school basically closed up all the rural schools, and students were bused into town.
But as long as there are still a few people living on the ranch, a few country schools will hang on with them. There's a family ranching near Iron Mountain, north of Cheyenne, been on the land for generations. And Charlie and Carol Farthing's kids go to a country school in nearby Ingleside.
We're a good hour from town if the roads are in good shape. You can attest to that yourselves today, probably. And, you know, Horse Creek now is 13 miles from our place, and our kids are still the closest students. We've got some more that come from up at the True Ranch, and, well, another True Ranch, and, you know, they go further than our kids. And, you know, it's quite a drive if you take those kids to Cheyenne, especially a kindergartner or first or second grader. A couple of years ago, we had a member of the school board in Cheyenne that wanted to close the school out here, and we were quite concerned we were going to lose it. And she'd never been out here. She just didn't understand the distances involved. And we finally did get her to come out to the school, and she agreed that indeed it was quite a ways from town, but she still never saw where the people lived, individual families that go to that school.
Now, you'll have to remember that when we talk about Yes, not.
The grasshopper lived with the ants.
Yes, that was the story of the grasshopper, wasn't it?
Everything. May I use a colored pencil, Miss Clausen?
Oh, right. Yes, but let's talk about it first, shall
I
we?
don't know what that is.
You don't know what that is? All right, what do we call a person that does magic tricks?
First thing we're going to do this morning, who's going to get the most cards today?
I bet I am.
Well, let's check to see.
I bet I am.
You need to know if you're going to get involved.
She has come from the fair. Seven, 8, 9.
Oh, good for you. That's great.
Steve B.
You really worked on your letters, didn't you?
I didn't work on them. I just know them pretty good.
Well, that's fine.
Like the Farthings, Jean Clausen's family has lived in this country for generations. The Farthings came to ranch while her family came to mine.
Okay, you're going, okay?
Well, my dad was on the school board, and he had hired a teacher to teach at Ingleside. They had to stay out, of course, for the week because they didn't have any transportation back. unless it was on Friday night when someone happened to be going to town. And the day that school opened, there were no teachers showed up. So he asked me if I would please come up and just sit with the kids at least until he could find some teachers to take it, and nobody wanted it, and that time they had to come out and stay. So I started going to school and teaching during the winter and going to school in the summer. I drove back and forth to Laramie.
You'd be going to school to get a teaching degree?
Mm-hmm.
So how long did that take?
10 years.
So you're teaching and working on
Yes.
the degree at the same time? Most of the one-room schools in the country have been absorbed into larger schools, which means more students, many more classrooms. But in Ingleside, things have gone in the opposite direction. They tore out a wall here and went from being a two-room school to a one-room.
If we could put 6 kids with a teacher in all our schools, it would make a great difference. I think a lot of the positive side is the fact that the children do get a lot of individual attention from the teacher, Mrs. Clausen. And even though they're at different grade levels, they learn, as they're working, they still learn other things from other grade levels, and by the time they reach 6th grade, they have a very well-rounded education.
Can you tell me how kids test when they come out of these country schools?
I think students coming from this environment compare very favorably as far as academics go. And one example I might cite is we had a young lady come in here in 2nd grade 2 years ago and was a long ways behind in actually knowing her letters and being able to read, and could not read even at the 1st grade level. And after Mrs. Clausen had her for a year and was able to teach and work with her in this small setting, she was testing out above grade level at the end of the year. And I think that's just an example of the small setting where it's kind of the best of all worlds. It's a resource room, it's a regular classroom, it's enrichment and education, because she's able to work with the kids. And I feel that academically they come out very well prepared to go to 7th grade. Now, in the curriculum in our schools in Cheyenne in the elementary, we do have separate art, music, and PE teachers in all the elementary schools. The only difference out here is that instead of getting PE like a half hour for 2 days a week, they get PE 1 day a week for an hour. But they do still get the same amount of time in a week's span that they do at the other schools. And that's part of the broad education spectrum. We want the kids to know a little bit about music, a little bit about art, and of course to be as physically fit as we can make them.
And the teacher had all the grades. I don't know how many children she had, but she taught all grades, which I did also when I taught. She'd have to come early in the morning and build her fire in the coal stove, and there'd be a pot-bellied stove there, and she'd build a fire and get her water in and get everything ready, wash her blackboards and sweep the floor and have everything done when we came home. After school she had to do the same thing. She had to do all her own work. And most of the teachers got from $40 to $80 a month.
The one that stands out in my mind the most was the Christmas program when it was about 40 below zero, and my dad hooked up the team to haul us through the snow because we couldn't get there otherwise. And I arrived a little late and breathless, and I had a terrible time memorizing all my parts. My brain was frozen, I think. And that Christmas stands out more than any, but it seemed more like Christmas than any other Christmas I've ever had, I think.
In many cases, the school was the heart of the community because there wouldn't be, in many cases, any stores or anything of that sort out in these rural neighborhoods. The school would be the place where people went to listen to Christmas programs, for example. They would go to the schoolhouse frequently for church services because various denominations would not have churches out in those neighborhoods, and so consequently they'd use the school building for that purpose. It would be used for entertainment. Various community clubs would get together and meet there, meet at the school. Individuals would organize dances that would be held at these country schools. So it became just the center of community activities. And in fact, there are a number of cases where the name of the school became the name of the community because the community so identified with the school that it would become that they would start sharing the name of the school.
When people think about the old country schools, they often think in extremes. Either it was a romantic setting, trudging miles through the country to a cozy wood-burning stove with a sensitive, wise teacher who helped the kids one-on-one, or it was a nightmare of ignorance, with shambly country kids in tatters, overworked at the homestead and unable to read or do sums.
There's a lot of anecdotal things about how students were shaped by one-room schools. I think that's about all that we can rely on in some respects, is that a lot of individuals living in Wyoming now can think back to happier days, in many cases happier days, when they were attending one-room schools. The teachers, on the other hand, I think you might get a different story from many of the teachers, because many of these individuals were placed out there at some very small school where they were not only the school teacher, they were also in charge of bringing in the wood. They were also in charge of making sure that the school was warm in the morning when the students arrived. They'd have to make sure that there was water in the school building because frequently most of these schools did not have any sort of running water or any kind of modern facilities. These individuals had to do all of their own janitorial work. They had to see that if there was something wrong with the building, like a door falling off or a window broken, they had to be the ones that would go to the school board or whoever was in charge in that area and beg those individuals, in some cases, to come over and take care of the problem. They'd have to deal with things like skunks that would climb in underneath the school, underneath the floors. And they were essentially an entire staff. They weren't just school teachers, they were janitors, they were sort of supervisors over the whole landscape out there.
In that little community out there in the country, that was the center of the world. And moms and dads of all the kids kind of met in the morning to talk about what was going on in the community, how things were, the weather, what activities were going on, local government issues. And in the evenings, they'd come and talk about what happened in the day, and did you hear this, and did you work on that? And our school functions, like for instance, the Christmas program or the Halloween party, were not only a thing looked forward to by our students, but by whole families as well. They would carry in dinners, and invite people who didn't have students in the school, and it was just a large community gathering every time we had some function.
Historically, education officials have played a role in consolidation.
I hear it more from legislators than I hear it from families whose children would be affected by the move.
How about from educators?
I guess I have two views about that. I would not want to say that educating a kindergartner or a first grader is better by having them travel 70 or 80 miles one way. But I wonder about if we're doing justice to a student who is high school age if they have to be in a community school where there's only one person in that grade. I feel like discussion that is generated in class settings where there are more than one student in a class are very, very valuable. especially to students at that age. And if I were a parent of a student of that age, I would consider bringing that student into a setting where there were more of his own age.
You've talked about country schools that need to exist because of the long distance the children would have to commute to a larger school. But what about a small country school supported by the parents that isn't that many miles from an urban center? Can you support keeping that kind of school operating?
As long as the school board has to make a very unpopular, difficult decision, it's highly likely they will remain. When, an example is in Torrington. I left Torrington to become our state superintendent, and it was real difficult to close some buildings that were very close to the city of Torrington. They did it, and it was hard. It was very difficult decisions to make, but they did it. I feel like the foundation program is one of the reasons why the system perpetuates that, because we pay the same amount of money for 8 or 10 students in a rural setting like that as we pay for 23 students who are in a more metropolis kind of a setting. And so not only do we have the desire of parents and people in a small community, but we also have a foundation program that supports it as well.
It's clearly a relic. No one is looking to resurrect the country school. On the other hand, many of the ideas that are at least being talked about, maybe not implemented, but ideas that are talked about were standard in the country school. Ideas like site-based management, where the teacher would be in charge, in this case, of the school. Now we have site-based management where principals are in charge of a building. That's a very typical idea, one that is occurring in places in Wyoming, and that occurred in the country school years ago. An idea like cooperative learning, where students would work together on a project. That's what some people think is a new idea. In the country schools, that was business as usual, and that was business every day. I can't think of a time in anyone's development where being in a warm environment that's supportive and where people know who I am and where they care about me and where my emotional and cognitive and social needs are being met, where that wouldn't do me some good. And so probably all age students would benefit from that. It's interesting to me that in very large cities, in the center of huge population areas, that one of the goals of teachers and administrators in large urban schools is to figure out ways to make big schools small. And so what they do is create schools within a school. And in fact, if I were in a school like that, if I were a student in a school like that, I might have a pod of a small group of students, and I would have a teacher who's assigned to me as a kind of mentor, as a kind of leader facilitator. Maybe not anyone I take classes from, but someone who I can go to when I have a problem or when I need to have a question answered. And in very many ways, that's a lot like the philosophy of the small one-room rural school, too.
The town is Hooterville. This is supposed to be a hospital. This is a place where they make the newspapers. Here's a jungle gym, a fire station, and Al's garage, probably a place where they fix cars. Then there's the jail. Cold.
Yes. Okay, you're going okay?
Not I, said the duck. Not I, said the pig. Not I, said the kitty.
Next year I go 50 miles into Cheyenne and go to McCormick.
Is that a big school?
Yes, or compared to this, it's huge.
When you're young, you really don't look back. You're always looking forward to something. And hopefully, after he goes through school and gets done with it, he'll look back and realize how lucky he was. I can guarantee you we don't have any drugs in this school over here. We don't have problems with kids bringing weapons to school. They do in Cheyenne. And, you know, I hope when he gets done, he'll look back and realize how lucky he was to have the individual attention from the teacher and maybe the quality of life that he had.
He's a very easygoing, very accepting child, and I think he'll do really well. Mom and Dad aren't handling it nearly as well as the child is. I worry because I know what he's going to get into going into that situation. He doesn't know what he's getting into. He's always been the oldest in the school, the oldest in the family, and I think it's going to be really a tough adjustment for him when he gets there. We've tried to kind of prepare the kids by having social things and involving other children their age, but once he gets there, he's kind of on his own. I think I can speak for Charlie, we're both very nervous about it. And the fact that he's 50 miles away, he's got a health problem, you know, the whole situation. So we're not real happy that he's leaving. We wish he could just continue here.
I think I like the variation here, and it seems like I don't know, I help more and can do more for them. In a larger group, you can't do individualized instruction like I like to do.
Our little school with all 6 of us in there, we'll pack that auditorium with over 50 people for, say, like a Christmas program, a potluck dinner at the end of school. And these people haven't had children in school there in decades. We have former teachers that come back, former principals that come back. It really is the social center for us.
One of the best things about being in a rural school was Mom and Dad, or one or the other, brought those students every morning. We had no buses and came and got them each night. So if you had something to tell Mom or Dad, good or bad, all you had to do was be there at the beginning of the day and the end of the day, and you could have wonderful discussions with parents. I've never had that kind of a situation with parents since I left the country schools.
They say you can't go home again, and we can't go back to the schools of a century ago. But we keep looking back in that direction, not so much with nostalgia as with hope. Hope that we can find ways to take the best of that era, the intimacy and personal attention of the one-room school, and give it to our children today. Thanks for joining us on Main Street, Wyoming.
Main Street, Wyoming is made possible in part by grants from Kennecott Energy, proud to be a part of Wyoming's future in the uranium exploration, mining, and production industry, and by the Wyoming Council for the Humanities, enriching lives of Wyoming people through the study of Wyoming history, values, and ideas.